Hello and welcome to episode 3 of season 7. Still hard to say that. Season 7, can you believe it? Of Long Candor. And love this season and the take that, we're taking on Women's History Month and the fact that, all of our speakers on this season are female industry leaders here to talk about hot topics and how to empower other women in their careers. As you know, I am Rob and I'm here with my co-host Bill, and thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. But before we get to our next speaker, let's dive into today's
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
And we'll have Bill kick that off.
Yeah, this one's interesting. Top business and technology trends in 2021, and it touches on 10 fields that will see significant innovation in the new year. This was an article that came out in Inc. magazine online. Interesting article. I mean, nothing that you wouldn't think of, right? The trend number one, development around the vaccines and testing. And I find this super interesting because a lot of people that are afraid to get the vaccine, first of all, step aside. I'll get it in your place. I'm dying to get my vaccine. I don't want to deal with this crap anymore. I mean, except for that, all the zombie movies do start off like that. That's the only thing that I can. Yeah, exactly. Well, fair enough. But seriously, I mean, one of the things you hear from people that are skeptical about a vaccine that came out so quickly, it's interesting because this is it's a revolution in the vaccine development industry. This RNA delivery is really amazing. If you can identify the spike protein, whatever that is, in the disease, you can plug that into this RNA delivery system, and you can literally not only come up with a vaccine for the current version of of whichever disease you're trying to cure, but also all the subsequent variants with subsequent boosters. Again, just identifying the spike protein. They also start to get into expansion of remote working, video conferencing. I would hate to be in commercial real estate right now. Tons of companies are going to reduce their square footage in terms of in-office capabilities because you realize you could work just as efficiently from home with current technology. And so while there are still companies, especially look at Google, look at Facebook, people are still going into the offices, and these are the companies that lead the world in innovation. So there's still something to being in person, but I think a lot of companies are starting to see that sort of bottom line being negatively affected by their commercial real estate holdings. And if they don't need it because they can work just as efficiently from home, that is just going to lead to a further embrace of a remote workforce and technology that's built around that.
Yeah, like the article hits on some really great things. I mean, and these are the things that just impact our lives so much now. Online education, telehealth, contactless shipping, these are just all.
I love the term contactless. I mean, was that a marketing term that just came out of the blue? Contactless delivery, contactless shipping, contactless whatever. Yeah, it's amazing. I see that. I hear that on commercials all the time.
Yeah, I mean, until the drones are delivering my Amazon boxes, this will do. This will do. But I'm excited about the drones too.
Have you had a telehealth or a telemedicine conversation with a doctor yet?
I haven't.
I did, and it wasn't just my shrink, who I talk to 17 times a day. It's interesting because the truth is that, especially for checkups, if you're going to go get your blood drawn, you can go to a lab, get the blood drawn, they get the results to your doctor, and then you just go over it online on essentially like a Zoom call. And the truth is, you don't have to go to a doctor's office anymore. Which leads to, by the way, things operating on time. If you have a 1:00 appointment, you're not moving from one waiting room to another. I just think that so much of the byproduct of adjusting to a world with COVID will stay even post-COVID, right? The things that make your companies, things that make your business, whether you're a doctor's office, a lawyer, a mega corporation, any embrace of technology that would have taken, let's say, years to embrace, have, because of COVID, become commonplace. Now you started to see how efficient it is. And I think they're here to stay, some of these things.
I think so too. And Bill, more importantly, when you had your consultation with your telehealth shrink, how did that make you feel? Sorry, psychology joke.
I was starting to tilt backwards and go back into my lay down on the couch position, but yes, I get your joke. Listen, I just think a lot of these things are here to stay. Online education, kids learning from home, increase in 5G. AI, robotics, things like that. It touches on a bunch of them. It's a really good article. Inc. has probably contributed as many articles to this podcast as anyone in terms of what we've commented on. This one is by, and I don't want to butcher your name because it's a great article, Anis Uzzaman. And it's in Inc.com. Check it out. Interesting article, Top Business and Technology Trends in 2021 and the 10 fields that will see significant innovation in the new year. Speaking of innovation, let's get to our speaker. In this segment, we've talked to Royce Cohen of Lighthouse, and she helps us cover how to efficiently and defensibly address Microsoft's Teams data. This is coming up on every call. I am absolutely positive if you're involved in eDiscovery and you are a listener to this podcast, you are going to want to check this out. Teams data is the new data that is just, it's so prolific. It's taking over the world. How to efficiently and defensively manage it and address it. Really a key topic. Interesting conversation with Royce. I think you'll enjoy it. Check it out. All right, let's get to the guest speaker portion of the program. And we have a topic today that is timely, comes up on almost every call I'm on, efficiently and defensively addressing Microsoft Teams data. To help us through this, we have our guest, Royce Cohen. Royce is the Director of Advisory Services here at Lighthouse. Royce, thank you so much for joining us and trying to explain this to Rob and I like we're 3 years old.
Happy to be here.
Royce, we've been kicking off the podcast in the last couple of seasons. We used to ask what you do a little brief introduction, and people would just basically give their name and title. And so we want to go a little deeper than that, because what we found is when we start to get into how people ended up in this industry, it's always an interesting story, because nobody like went to college and said, I know what I want to do. I want to get into electronic discovery. And by the way, I'm not even talking about for those of us who've been in this business for 15 or 20 years. Kids that are going to school now don't even know what we do. My mother doesn't know what I do. So if you could just give us a brief synopsis of how you got into eDiscovery and how you found yourself in the position you're in now.
And for Bill, it was actually court ordered that he got into eDiscovery, but that's a separate story.
It is a funny story. Just for background a bit, I paralegaled. I worked at the DA's office. I worked in legal services before I went to law school. And so then I went to law school in the late 90s and graduated in early 2000s and was working. There was an up and coming reinsurance industry was getting very busy at that time. And so I started working there, and we were doing some doc review, and I was sitting in a conference room with some colleagues, and one of the senior associates came in and she said, all right, I'm going to need you two, not pointing at me, to go to Chicago. We've got a whole bunch of documents out there. You're going to be there. It'll probably be 2 weeks, but to be honest, they always say 2 weeks and it's longer. And at the time, I had just broken up with my boyfriend from law school. Post 9/11, I don't know how many of you were in New York, but there was a lot of either breakups or getting together. And people were making massive life decisions, and mine, unfortunately, was the former. And so one of my colleagues was like, oh my God, I don't want to go to Chicago, because they were getting together. They were getting married. They had the opposite. And I raised my hand and said, please, please, please send me to Chicago. Get me the hell out of here. And I did. And 2 weeks turned into 3 months. But what happened was, there was a lot of documents. We had to get through all of them. We had to organize them, review them. And I quickly learned, frankly, that the better you knew the documents as a young attorney, the more you got to go and do the fun stuff like second chair depositions, go to court, et cetera. And so I became, unlike many of my colleagues, very interested and happy to work on the discovery side of things so that I could so that I could eventually, take a deposition, first one in my class to do that and those kind of things. So I should thank that ex-boyfriend who's back in Canada.
I mean, you feel free to name him here on the podcast. Absolutely. Throw his name out there if you want. Yeah. You throw his phone number out, his social security number, whatever you want. Feel free.
Right? It's tempting. I know, but he's a good guy. Just, not a native. And I think for the natives, we weren't going anywhere after 9/11. And for anyone who came from somewhere else, it was probably a tough decision for them. But I wasn't going anywhere.
No doubt with your many other boyfriends in the Niagara Falls area in Canada. Sorry, that's a movie reference if you got that.
I do know it, but I
Breakfast
can't.
Club.
Breakfast Club.
Nice. Anyway, no, thanks, Royce. That helps. We love hearing these stories about, the weird ways that we all ended up here. And talking about Microsoft Teams today, which is a topic that, we find endlessly fascinating. And I know it's really important for a lot of our clients right now. One question we had for you is that, there's this balance between, creating like optimal collaboration within a company. And then you are sort of weighing that against things that might impact e-discovery or, unintended consequences of having to, retrieve this information later. What do you think is that right balance there?
It's tough. I don't know if there's a good answer. The need for collaboration tools is just, they're useful in so many different ways, but particularly in light of the circumstances that we're living in today. And so I think that it's really, really important for not only for the work product, right, but for sanity, for human contact, to have those personal connections. And I think when those tools, when Microsoft or, the other companies come up with those tools, they don't always think about the end result, but it's kind of, it's the same thing with any human nature, right? Anything that you do, you're thinking, wow, I'd really love that ice cream. And even though we're all well aware that it may not be the best thing for us right then, we're still going to enjoy it and have it. And so I think with Teams, and I think with many collaboration tools, you don't know where the data, because there are multiple people working together, there's the obvious problem, even if you're not a technologist, right? Of whose data is it? Right. Whereas the original world was my data because, it was my document. It's in my office. They can easily question me about it at a deposition. And now it's multiple people's data, and it's very complicated. It's very complicated in terms of how that, from an e-discovery perspective, can get processed.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because it is true. Microsoft is with 365 now, especially, right? They are trying to make the goal is to make business easier. They want to own all your data. They want to understand each aspect of your business, and they want to make it easier for you. And then they go, oh wait, how are we going to deal with this from an e-discovery perspective, which they're also involved in? So it becomes their problem that they're creating, but it's almost as if, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, right? Because you have this side of the company, Microsoft, really building efficiencies into the way the company does business. And then this side saying, oh my God, what did you do? How are we going to deal with this now from an e-discovery perspective? So let's just go over a couple of the challenges. I mean, you mentioned that, sometimes with like, let's say Teams data, it's not owned by anybody. There's no sent to, sent from, right? There's no, it's not owned by anybody. It sort of exists in this collaborative platform. So what are some of the other challenges that we're dealing with?
So I think let's say, you have, one of the greatest things about collaboration tools in general, right, is to be able to edit the same document. If you think about the way we used to do that, where you'd have to send a document and then save a new version and multiple people, that was the worst, right? You send a document to 10 people and everyone starts editing it. And then, and I'll even go back to myself as the young associate, you get these 10 different versions, and as humans do, they don't always agree. And now, you're like trying to figure out, do I choose the partner who's in charge of me, or do I choose the partner who I think is right? Or, you know what, that fifth year associate actually has it right. And the partners are not going to be happy that I'm not taking their edits in, right? So there are so many ways that it is extraordinarily beneficial, right? You all go into one document and you edit it, and you could see other people's comments, and not only do you see their comments, but they could leave you like, I'm doing this because of. And so there's so many benefits to that. On the other hand, because things like autosave exist, you have the problem of versioning, or modern attachments. You end up including, even in a chat, you can include a document and everybody's editing it. And then somebody says, hey, so does this look good to you? Yep, it looks good to me. And now that document is, or using the example of Microsoft, they have new features all the time. They have this new approval feature. You include that approval feature, it approves this document, but it doesn't freeze the document. So that document can be edited after it's approved. And now, 6 months later, there's preservation because there's a potential litigation. A year later, documents are collected, reviewed, produced, and now we're a year and a half later from whatever blow up happened. And you're looking at this, okay, so I did approve it. You're the deponent in the deposition, and you're looking at this document and you're thinking, did I include, right? Because it's a year and a half. So it's a year and a half later, you're thinking, did I include that provision in the contract? I must have. It's there. They have it right in front of me. And that's real. It's a problem. Like that is a major problem that would happen. And as someone who has taken and defended more depositions than I can count, it is not something that, unless you're in the world of e-discovery, that you would even think about as to why a document would be there that the deponent wouldn't remember.
That is kind of really one of the tough things is you have, people are developing features that, can be really helpful, but nobody asked the e-discovery person whether that feature was a good idea. And when you get into that situation, often you're just sort of stuck with these things. How do you start to overcome those challenges? What advice are you giving to people?
Well, one of the things that I love that we work on is that we have something called Cloud Compass, where frankly, we get the opportunity to look at all of Microsoft's features and we evaluate them for whether or not they impact e-discovery. And then those that could impact e-discovery, we sit around as if we're in a living room with a couple of cocktails, but we sit around.
By the way, I want to join your team. If that's the way you guys are doing things, I just want to say the next time there's an opening on the team, if you're sitting around talking about Microsoft, but doing it with cocktails, I'm in. Just saying.
And so there's myself, who's an attorney. There's a number of technologists. There's people who've worked in e-discovery, and we talk about these features from all angles, from the GDPR, from all angles of data requests, GDPR, everything, and come up with, how could this impact the e-discovery process? And we do exactly what we started the conversation with. We evaluate the benefits, right, and the detriments, and then say, how should this organization move forward with this feature? So of all the hundreds of features that Microsoft comes out with, it's one of my favorite things that I work on, because you get to see all the new features and figure out ways to benefit your clients. And then we have this report that says, you really have to look at it from a company culture perspective, right? The culture at your company, the risk tolerance you have. Do you want to implement this feature recognizing that there are e-discovery risks and that your e-discovery workflow will have to change or may have to change depending on how you go about it? And that is one way that I think is an exceptional way that people can go about addressing the new features.
And so let's get into that a little bit. So do most corporations have someone in-house that is a Microsoft expert that sits around and does this, that goes, hopefully they're not drinking alone and doing it. Hopefully they have a group like you do. But do they have someone that is sitting there? Do they sit in IT? So if you want to have put a process in place to overcome these challenges, and you want to make that a defensible process, and not everybody has the group that we have here that sits around and has cocktails and discusses the e-discovery implications of each feature that Microsoft rolls out as they're rolling them out. So would you encourage companies to have someone with this level of expertise, or is this something that you just as well should, from a best practice perspective, outsource?
So I think it really all depends on the company. I think the companies that I have, and my perspective, right, is in the court perspective. So I've seen, I would say, the worst of the worst, the companies that are the most trouble, because I come in after there's a problem. And so that's one of the benefits of now being here, is that I get to help prevent those problems. But I would say that the companies that are really well run are the ones that have not only a dedicated person, right, but a dedicated governance group that has stakeholders from all different departments throughout the company, so that they represent the different company needs. Because there's a lot of reasons, for example, why you would need to retain data for rules, regs, laws, etc. But there's also now, particularly with the increase of privacy regs, why you need to destroy that data. And how do you balance those two needs? And you have people who work on both, opposite sides of the fence, and they need to be able to work together to come up with a way to, defensibly retain and delete data. And so with Microsoft, I think, of course, if you have implemented Microsoft, it makes sense to have a project owner and someone who has a direct contact to individuals who really know how to implement and use the program, especially with the features updating as frequently and improving, frankly, as frequently as they do.
Yeah, that's great, Royce. It really makes sense. And it's crazy how many of our clients that we are dealing with these things literally on a day-to-day basis. Just a great insight. Hey, one other thing that we've been doing this season is, in celebration of Women's History Month, we're asking all of our guest speakers a quick question. And that would be, what advice would you give to other women in the industry that are, looking to move their careers forward and just interested in any experience you've had with that, or any thoughts that you might lend?
So I think it'd probably be twofold. The first would be something I learned as I started becoming, let's say, more senior and not older, as the time passed, was that I realized that as individuals came into the industry or just came into whatever profession they were doing, that some individuals were very confident and some individuals were very competent, and they're just not interchangeable. And in my experience, and it's not scientific at all, I would say more likely than not, men would be very confident, and more likely than not, women, there were very competent women who did not have the confidence. And so I would say that I think in many circumstances, particularly if you've never done something before, it makes sense, to check yourself, right? To say, like, I've never done this before. I really need to make sure I know what I'm doing. But also that there's only one opportunity to make a first impression, and to let people know that I may not know this, right? To balance it. I may not know this right now, but I'm going to learn it and I'm going to be able to do an excellent job. And so really to try to put themselves out there as much as you can, recognizing that everybody who's sitting to your left and to your right, in front of you and back of you, they also don't know what they're doing. And then the other thing that I would say, particularly in ediscovery, where we have ediscovery, information governance, privacy, security, all of these new industries that didn't exist 20 years ago, there's very few people who are really experts and who really know what they're talking about, right? You have the GDPR, but it's been around 2 years, right? You have the CCP, that's been implemented for 6 months. There's, other privacy. Everything is so new that now is the time more than any other industry where you could jump in, you could learn as much as you can, and really, frankly, learn everything that's out there, because it's not that much, and really gain control over your future and really choose, what you want to do much more so than you could with other industries where there's like a designated path that's been around for 200 years. You're supposed to do it exactly
like the law firm path.
Why would you think I would have any issue with that? But exactly. But that's exactly right. Like, you really have an opportunity to create your own future because of all these new subjects that are out there, and it's a wonderful opportunity that everyone should take advantage of.
So before I summarize some of the genius points that you brought up today in today's podcast, and by the way, thank you again for joining us, I just want one follow-up question. When you said having more confidence than you do competence, I couldn't tell. Were you looking at me or Rob when you said that? I just want, for the record, because I know our listeners can't actually see this, but you were clearly staring right into the camera. And I just couldn't tell. Were you focusing on Rob or me? You said confidence over competence is not a good thing, and then you stared into the camera for a second. I just want to make sure, because I could talk to the booking agent to decide whether or not you come back to this podcast. Okay. So you answer wisely here. I'm kidding. Royce, thank you so much. I'm going to try to summarize here. So, we talked about this, and this is not the first time we've discussed it, right? Microsoft is trying to make business better, and part of, and through all sorts of, functionality and features within the Microsoft 365 platform. And part of that is collaboration tools. And there's never been a need. They probably didn't even realize the need for collaboration tools as much as we do now post-COVID, right? As soon as COVID hit, not only did the Microsoft stock soar up, but I mean, the use of these collaboration tools really soared as well. But at the same time, as Rob had mentioned, it's almost as if they don't let anybody on the e-discovery side know. And what are the ramifications of adding a feature like this? Even though it's better for business, does this complicate legal side? So some of the challenges it creates, and I think one of the things that we touched on was approvals. And I love the anecdote that you told. Like, you're sitting in a deposition, you clearly approved a document. That document says something that you're like, oh my gosh, why would I have approved this? Did I approve this? I must have approved this. My name's right here. I clearly approved this, because it was 18 months ago and you don't realize. So being on top of these features and functionalities as they roll out, because they do roll out quite often, and figuring out what the downstream effect is on that with legal, having a project owner on the Microsoft side, always a good idea. Understanding your risk profile of the company, what you're willing to take on, how, the benefit of these features to your business, and, weighing that against the risk that legal will surely point out if they're on top of it. I mean, this is going to be an evolving topic. I think this is going to be, this is certainly not going to go away. As you said, there are no real experts. How could you be an expert in something that's, how about these features, right? I'm an expert on how to process data with Teams. Oh, really? Because that just started about 6 months ago. So I just think that this is super interesting. We would love to have you back to talk about how this thing evolves. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciated it.
Thanks, Royce.
Thank you for having me.
All right, for all of those fans and others looking to stay up to date on all things Law and Candor, just subscribe. Once you subscribe, you are in our virtual Rolodex. You are in our contacts, and we will continue to update you on all the exciting things about the show. Thank you.